My name is Alice, and I'm a data scientist and Taylor Swift fan. Today, I'll be breaking down her 10 studio albums into 22 data visualizations. Let's get started. I looked at Taylor's music from 6 different angles, starting with her popularity. Now, we all know that Taylor writes famous songs, but just how many famous songs has she written? Out of all the songs on her albums, 3 and 4 have made it to the top 100 Billboard hits. 1 and 4 have made it to the top 10. That's over 3 dozen songs. For half her albums, every song on the album makes it onto the top 100 at some point. And in October 2022, for the first time in history, the entire Billboard Top 10 consisted of songs from a single album, Midnights. Her Eras tour has been in high demand, and for good reason. If you look at her past album and tour schedule, you'll see that every few years she comes out with an album and follows it immediately with a tour. So it's album tour, album tour. Well, it's been 5 years since her last tour, and she's released 4 studio albums since then: Lover, Folklore, Evermore, and Midnights. To top it all off, the Eras tour covers all 10 studio albums. It's essentially a best-of tour, which is why people are so excited about it. Another incredible thing about Taylor Swift is that her audience keeps on growing. If you look at her past 5 tours, you'll see that ticket sales have increased in a linear fashion. For all of her tours, she's nearly sold out every show, and the Eras tour is no different. On November 15, 2022, she sold 2 million tickets for the Eras tour. It broke the record for most tickets ever sold for an artist on a single day. The US leg of the Eras tour has room for 2.4 million fans. With her past tours serving a 30% international audience, she'll likely be performing for 3.6 million people on this tour. So know that if you didn't get US tickets, there may still be hope to land an international ticket. With all this data analysis, I hope I've proven to you that Taylor Swift is the greatest of all time. Now let's dig into her sound. One of the interesting things about Taylor Swift is that her sound keeps on changing. I extracted data from the Spotify API to quantify her sound change over time. On the x-axis, you have how acoustic or electronica a song sounds, and the y-axis is how musically positive or negative a song sounds. I took the average for each album, which is represented as 1 dot on this chart. So you'll see that her sound starts kind of country, then it moves to pop, and all these albums are kind of clustered around each other. And then you move further from that cluster, and she gets angry on Reputation. She falls in love in Lover. She slows down in Folklore and Evermore, and then she gets real on Midnights. And I thought it was so cool that you could actually see this change over time in a graph. Now, if you look at the songs on all her albums, you'll notice that she uses a variety of keys. But the most interesting part of this all, I think I may have found an Easter egg, is that on Folklore, she writes a song in 11 out of the 12 keys. And this is really unusual. So then I got to thinking, what about that 12th key? And I found that on Evermore, there's this one song in that 12th key, and that song was Happiness, which is in the missing key of B, and it was the last song written on the album. So I really think that Taylor tried to write a song in every key in Folklore and Evermore, because it's just the type of thing that she would do. I also looked at the most common key of each album. So you'll see that early on, she was writing songs in D, E, F, and so on. And then later on, she's writing a lot of songs in C. So again, if you know music, you know C is the easiest key to write songs in. But what I think is interesting, or my interpretation of this, is that I think songs on her earlier albums may have been written on guitar, like the key of F sharp you'll see here. That's not something you would typically just compose on the piano. But then later, I think she's writing more songs on the piano, on Lover, with Aaron Dessner, on Folklore and Evermore. This is my guess of what her instrument transition is over time. And then finally for the keys, I wanted to look at her major keys versus minor keys. So major keys are typically happy sounds and happy songs, and then minor keys are kind of sad, somber songs. So the interesting part is that most of her songs are in major keys. Fearless and 1989 are written entirely in major keys, and then there's very few minor keys. And even though she writes a lot of sad songs, the majority of her songs are still in major keys. And there's only 16 songs on her 147 songs on her albums that are in minor keys. And you'll see these are the songs here. So So I found this really interesting because I was just thinking, like, what's one of Taylor's saddest songs? Probably All Too Well. And so then I listened to the instrumental version of All Too Well, and I recommend you go try to do it yourself. But it sounds really boppy and happy. But then once you overlay the lyrics, then that's when you're sitting in the corner of your room crying. So there you go for Taylor's sound. It's changed a lot over time, but she's consistently put out great music. Now let's move on to her lyrics. This is my favorite section of this whole video because she has such great lyrics. And when I looked at the seasons that she talked about in all of her songs, I found that summer is mentioned more than any other season. So for example, in Cruel Summer, she also talks about fall and winter, like in All Too Well or Back to December, and then she very rarely talks about spring. So I guess not a lot is happening for her in the spring. I also looked at the days of the week that she talks about, and she talks about a lot of them, especially Tuesday nights, but she doesn't talk about Thursday or Saturday yet, so we are still waiting for those songs. I also wanted to look at the complexity of Taylor Swift's lyrics. She uses some pretty big words in her songs, and I think it's incredible that even with complex words like melancholia, 5 of these songs here still made it into the Billboard Top 10. Next, I'm going to look at the swear words in Taylor Swift songs. So when I was listening to the Midnights album, I realized that there was a lot more swearing than I had been used to with Taylor Swift songs. So I mapped out all the times that she used swear words in her albums. You'll see that the first time she used the D word was in just one song on her debut album, and then no swear words appeared in her next 2 albums, Fearless or Speak Now. And then since then, she slowly introduced swear words into her vocabulary, up to the point where on Midnights, half the songs are explicit. And another interesting point I want to bring up here is that while it's not a swear word, the only time she's ever used the term sexy is in the song Antihero. And she says, "Sometimes I feel like everybody's a sexy baby and I'm a monster on a hill." So I think it's pretty amazing that that's the first time that she's referenced that word in over 200 songs that she's written. And then just for fun, I wanted to show you the first time that each swear word is introduced into her vocabulary. I also found that as she gets older, she uses the term never less. So I looked at a bunch of terms that Taylor Swift used, and she uses never a lot. So on Speak Now, you'll see that more than 3/4 of her songs on that album contain the term never. But that's decreased over the years. She used to talk about never getting back together with someone, and now she uses both never and always, like this lyric from Antihero. I looked at the first time she talked about boys, girls, and men and women in her songs. So here are all her albums, and when she was 16, she talked about boys and girls a lot in her songs. And then the first time she talked about a man in terms of a romantic relationship, she was 24, and she said, "My ex-man brought his new girlfriend," and that was in Shake It Off. And then the first time she used the word woman in one of her songs is when she was 30, and in Folklore, she talks about meeting some woman on the internet. Now that she's in her 30s, she's incorporating the term woman more into her vocabulary. And then I looked at the first time she used terms like girlfriend or boyfriend in her songs. So the first time she used the term girlfriend was referencing somebody else, and she was 18 at the time. And the first time she referenced the term boyfriend wasn't until she was 27. And then you see she talked about wives in Mad Woman on Folklore, and she actually hasn't referenced the term husband in her main album yet. This is on the deluxe album. So she's slowly, I would say, growing up is what we see from her vocabulary. Finally, I'd like to talk about the colors on Taylor Swift albums. She talks about so many colors. Every line here is a different color that she references in her album. And the coolest pattern that I found was that in her earlier albums, like on Reputation, she talks about things being red, gold, blue, and black. And now on Midnights, her colors are really complex. She talks about maroon and lavender and sapphire, and it's just really beautiful. And then just for fun, I wanted to look at the eye colors that she references, because she always talks about people's beautiful eyes, and she started talking about blue and green eyes, but more recently she switched to indigo and opal eyes that are a bit more complex. And finally, I looked at sky colors because if I'm looking at eye colors, why not sky colors? You can see that Taylor Swift talks about a whole rainbow full of colors. Now let's move on to her collaborators. Taylor Swift has collaborated with a lot of other musicians and songwriters over the years. There are several well-known musicians who made it huge after opening for Taylor Swift. Both Ed Sheeran and Shawn Mendes were mildly popular before they toured with her, and then after they toured with her, they ended up releasing some of their biggest hits. What I mean by big hit is that the music video has more than 1 billion views on YouTube. So Ed Sheeran came out with Thinking Out Loud, and Shawn Mendes came out with Stitches. Also, Camila Cabello toured with Taylor Swift after she already had her hit Havana, but after the Reputation tour, she came out with Señorita, which was an equally big hit. So a fun fact is that Camila attended the 1989 tour as a fan, and then later she ended up touring with Taylor Swift, which is a dream come true. I also looked at the average number of writers on each Taylor Swift album. So Taylor Swift writes all her songs, but she also has co-writers on some of her albums. The only one where she doesn't have a co-writer is Speak Now, which she wrote entirely on her own. And then on the Reputation album, she had the most number of co-writers. The main ones were Max Martin, Shellback, and Jack Antonoff. Now, if we look at the main co-writer for each Taylor Swift album, the first one was Liz Rose, and she's also well known for writing Girl Crush by Little Big Town. And then you have the Martin-Shellback combo, and they're also well known for writing a ton of hit songs for Britney, Pink, and so on. And then you have Jack Antonoff, who also co-wrote the song We Are Young by Fun, and also Aaron Dessner, who she wrote her Folklore and Evermore albums with. One thing I found very interesting is looking at the biggest hits that she wrote with each co-writer. So with Liz Rose, she wrote Teardrops on My Guitar, You Belong With Me, and All Too Well, which are all really sad songs. And then with Martin Shellback, she wrote Blank Space, Shake It Off, Wildest Dreams, which are her pop hits. With Jack, she wrote Out of the Woods, Look What You Made Me Do, and Antihero, which I call the angsty songs. And with Aaron Dessner, she wrote Cardigan and Willow, which are the thoughtful songs. And she's also written a ton of songs by herself. So if you look at some of the most popular songs that she wrote by herself, which are Love Story, Enchanted, and Lover, those are the love songs. And I think it's so cool that she kind of has this brand of pop songs or brand of hit songs that she writes with each co-writer. Taylor Swift has also written songs for some of the most popular pop artists in the industry. We have Rihanna, Miley Cyrus, and she's inspired a whole new generation of songwriters like Olivia Rodrigo and Conan Gray. So typically we talk about the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but I really think it should be switched to Taylor Swift because she's so well connected in the industry. So moving on for collaborators, let's talk specifically about the Midnights album. I have been listening to this album on repeat for the past few months, and I found that there's this theme of up and down. So even the title, Midnights, that's the time when both hands of the clock are pointing up. And I looked at every song on the album, and I found that there were up lyrics and down lyrics in every single song. So first, if we look at some of the up lyrics, she talks about staring at the ceiling, looking up at the sky, staring directly at the sun. Those all reference things that are up. And then later in her album, she talks about a lot of things that are going down, like tears falling, dominoes cascading. And then in a lot of her songs, she compares up and down. So I love the Antihero one where she talks about being a monster on a hill, but also being down in hell and laughing at people on earth. So she's both up and down, which is just so cool. It's totally something Taylor Swift would do. And also I found that on Midnights, one song leads to another. So if we look at the first few songs of the album, you'll see that the first song is about lavender haze, and then the second song has the term hazy in it. And then in that second song, she talks about having this legacy to leave, and then the third song, she talks about leaving them in the will. And then in her third song, she talks about dreaming, which moves to her fourth song where she also talks about dreaming. So every song is connected to the next one. It's crazy. And then in Snow on the Beach, she talks about the snow coming down, and that connects to the last 4 songs on the album, where in Labyrinth, she says the plane was going down. And then in Karma, she talks about karma's relaxing thought, and she just referenced the term thought in Labyrinth. And then in Karma, she talks about sweet, and that ties into Sweet Nothings. And then in Sweet Nothings, she talks about what a mind, and that leads to the final song, which is Mastermind. My mind was blown when I found this pattern. And then from the very first song on her album, where she talks about meeting me at midnight, to the last song where she talks about being like clockwork, everything revolves around this idea of up, down, and clocks. And she just has this really solid theme to this album that's also a cool pop piece. And one really cool thing I found when I was doing a lot of math, her Midnight's release date was October 21st, 2022, and her birthday is December 13th, 1989. And if you subtract those, that equals 12,000 days. And her album is about midnights, which is 12 o'clock. It's mind-blowing. So that leads me to my final section, which is about Taylor Swift being a mastermind. So when I looked at all her lyrics, I found that her album titles often come from prior song lyrics, except for Folklore, because that was a surprise album. But I think the ones that she planned, they were very beautifully planned. So let me show you. Here are her first 4 albums. And then she talks about the term 89 in her first album, Taylor Swift. And then she names her 5th album, 1989. She talks about Reputation in Fearless, and then she names her album Reputation. She talks about Ex-Lovers in 1989, which goes on to her Lover album. We're going to skip Folklore because that was her surprise album. And then finally in Reputation, she talked about wanting Midnights and Forevermore, and those were her most recent 2 albums. I also found that she uses prior album titles in her future lyrics. So for example, I'd Be a Fearless Leader. She talked about that in Lover, which is the later album, but she had this album Fearless from a long time ago. Or for her album Folklore, she mentions the name in Evermore, My Mind Turns Your Life into Folklore. Pretty much everything is connected when it comes to Taylor Swift. I saw a speech with Taylor Swift where she talked about organizing her music into the style of 3 pens. So she imagines what type of pen she has in her hand, and then she writes a song with that. So one of those pens is the fountain pen, where she paints this vivid picture. There's also the quill pen, where she says things that are antiquated, and the glitter gel pen, where everything is carefree and bouncy. She says that most of her songs are fountain pen songs, and I saw that many of her Folklore and Evermore songs are quill songs, and then finally, her top pop hits are usually these glitter gel pen songs. On Apple Music, she shared the pen type of her songs. So you'll see the fountain pen type song is like this line from Lover, My Heart's Been Borrowed and Yours Has Been Blue. For the quill pen, you see I'm Like the Water When Your Ship Rolled In That Night from Willow. And then for the glitter gel pen, it's basically all of You Need to Calm Down. Now looking at the data behind her songs, I think there might be a 4th pen type. So stick with me on this. She shared the pen type of every song on Midnights except for one. So you'll see all of her songs from Midnights here, and this one has no pen type. And this is the classic Taylor Revenge song. So I imagine her using a permanent marker and writing in all caps as she is writing this song. And I thought, oh, how fun would it be just to look at her past revenge songs. So this is a timeline of her revenge songs over the years. We have Picture to Burn, Better Than Revenge, Bad Blood, Look What You Made Me Do, Mad Woman, and then her most recent song on Midnights. And what I found interesting is that her revenge songs have changed over the years, from taking down a woman for stealing her man to teaming up with a woman to take down a man. And that's so Taylor to have evolved like that. We are at our last data visualization, and so I'm going to go through the last line of every Taylor Swift album. What I found really cool here is that the last line of her albums gives you a feel of her mental state when she's writing the album. So for her first 3 albums, these are her teen years, and she's starting her songwriting career, fighting for change and making big plans. The next few albums, she's in her 20s, she's learning to overcome hard things, and she found someone she truly loves. And in her 30s, she's more sure of what she wants, what she believes, and who she is, and her language is just more confident, and it's so cool to have watched her grow up and evolve over time. And there you have it. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling 22 Taylor Swift data visualizations. I hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Alice, and you can find my other analysis projects at A Dash of Data.